In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Good evening. We're so glad to have you all with us this evening, and thank you for tuning in to Older Women Likewise. We're glad to have Dana and Judy and Jill on the program this evening. We're going to be talking about the comfort of God and each other, and how we're going to talk about how God comforted people in the Bible, and of course how he comforts us, and how people in the Bible comforted one another. And again, we'll throw in some tips about how we can comfort one another. But first, Dana, I have to ask, where are you? I don't know this place.
I'm in my quiet spot. I'm in my craft room, sewing, painting, crafting, whatever. And it's just quieter here, and I don't have to move everything. And so
it's very intriguing. It makes me want to come and visit and see what
you do that. I'd love to have you.
Judy, y'all doing okay? You had that nice trip. Your honeymoon trip, wasn't it? Anniversary.
Well, it was an anniversary trip. We celebrated 57 years.
Wow.
And so we went to Amelia Island, and first time we'd been there, and it was really nice. We enjoyed it. We kind of wore ourselves out the first day. Oh, let's do this. Let's do that. Oh, let's get on a boat. Let's go play mini golf. Oh, let's walk around the town. Oh, Well, let me tell you, that night, I died. I mean, I was just out flat, I mean, we just are not in our 50s anymore, but we think we are. That's the problem.
That's true.
But it was great. It was wonderful. We had a great time.
That's marvelous. Jill, things going well for you? You're still muted, so let me let you unmute first.
I'm just enjoying hearing everybody else. Oh, yeah, the weather is beautiful here in North Carolina today. It's very, very pleasant. My hummingbirds are coming to the feeder.
Oh, that's always nice.
I love seeing them.
Yeah. Sounds really good. So, well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight as we talk about the comfort that God gives us and the comfort we give each other. So I asked the ladies ahead of time to think about some Bible characters who received comfort from God, and to think about some scriptures that we see where that God did comfort others and does comfort us. Jill, do you have one you'd like to share?
Well, the first one I thought of, and I don't know if you're going to think this is comforting or not, but when Cain killed Abel, before that happened, he had made a sacrifice to God, and it was not acceptable. A lot of times rejection is difficult for people to bear. And it was for Cain, but God comforted him, I think, in saying, why are you angry? Why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? Try again. But obviously Cain dealt with his problem a different way. But to me, God was trying to comfort him, let him know, we can work this out. We can get around this obstacle.
Along with Cain, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of, but I did think about, when he was sent out, and after he did kill his brother, and he was afraid of being killed, God said, I will put a mark on you, and that won't happen. And that's what I thought, even then, God was always striving to comfort others. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes when we sin, we think God has just and God has turned away from us. He hates us. He don't want to have anything to do with us. But I think the story of Cain really brings out that if we'll just turn back and do what's right, God will comfort us and encourage us. That's a wonderful story, Jill. I really like
It
that.
is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Very good.
Good opening.
Good.
Well, I thought, let's start at the beginning, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it. That's
That was
good.
good. That was good.
And we can comfort one another in that same way, can't we?
Mhm.
When someone does wrong, instead of again turning away from them and say, "Well, you're off my list," we can tell them like
Yeah.
God did. Just
Yeah.
do what's right. Everything's going to be all right.
And I hadn't thought ahead to what the point that Dana brought out about it, but sometimes people just don't want to be comforted. Have you ever thought, oh, I should say this, and this, and this, and it seemed like the exact right thing to say, and that was not what they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And it's hard sometimes to predict what's going to, help set someone's mind at ease.
Mm-hmm. Especially in death, I think that's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Many times I know I've heard, it's better left unsaid. Just be there
Mhm.
and just put an arm around somebody, and if they want to say something, let them. But a lot of times we think that we need to say things, and even things like, well, we know that person's in heaven and, whatever. At that moment, it is so hard because they're grieving. They're grieving. Yes, they know if he's a Christian or she. Yeah, they know they're in heaven, but to hear it's the absence of that person, and it's so new,
Yeah.
so I think it's really important to kind of be silent to a degree.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I don't want to jump ahead of anybody,
That's
but
good. Go ahead.
so when I heard about the topic, first of all, I think there's comfort both spiritually and physically, and I kind of saw that in Scripture. But I think I told you this, Isla, is that the first thing that came to my mind was David in Psalm 23, as far as God comforting. I mean, he just, he restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness, for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. For why? Because thou art with me. And then thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
Mhm.
And prepare a table for my enemies. And my cup runneth over. So with goodness and mercy. So for me, David, I just, I thought it was a wonderful way that he was comforted
Mhm.
by God. That was one of my, I have several, but that was
Yeah.
really my first one that I thought of was David in the 23rd Psalm. Yeah.
That's really
That's
good.
good. That's good.
That psalm often is a comfort for us as
Mhm.
we read it and meditate on it. It also can be a comfort for all of us.
Yeah.
Dana?
Especially thinking that the rod and the staff, those were
Yes.
the tools that the shepherd used to secure the sheep and to protect them from outside
Mm-hmm.
problems. So
Exactly.
we need both of those things.
Right.
But it was also used for discipline
Mm-hmm.
and bring them back in line, which I think is such a good point. We don't always think of that as comfort, but aren't we all better off if we had parents who properly disciplined us? And of course, we're better off since God does, and God does it, as you brought out, Jill, in a loving manner. We can work with this. We can always come back to Him. And there's so many examples of that in Scripture.
Right.
We had a young man who showed up at church last night that we haven't seen in a while. And I have a good relationship with him, but it just ended about 3 or 4 months ago. And I just haven't been able to get him to respond and so on and so forth. And I texted yesterday evening, early evening, and just said, sure would hope you're doing well. Sure would like to hear from you. Well, just as we pulled in the parking lot at church, he called. And he ended up, and he just lives behind the building. He ended up getting on his bike and coming up there. And anyway, we were talking after church, and he was like, I just was scared to see how you would respond because I haven't talked to you in a while and I hadn't been to church. And I told him, I said, James, I'm not going to judge you. And you just, we love you and we want you back. And I think sometimes we're so afraid of discipline and we don't see it as comfort, but he knows what he needs to do and where he needs to be. And we need to strive to be more like God. And there's always a second chance, and be a comfort to people, even when they blow it. Talking about blowing it, I think about Ahab. I mean, was there anybody more wicked other than maybe Manasseh? And God restored Manasseh. And I think of the time that Ahab was so upset, and I didn't look up that scripture, but where he prayed and God forgave him, and make the point. How does he word it? The humility or something of my servant Ahab. I mean, wow, how amazing is that? I don't think any of us, hopefully, are as wicked as Ahab or Manasseh. And there's comfort from God, no matter where we're at.
Yeah.
I kind of thought of Ahab in a different way. I was thinking about how Jezebel comforted him when he wanted that vineyard, and he pitched a fit and went to bed and and she's like, "Oh, don't worry, I'm going to get that vineyard for you." And she did.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah,
I'm not sure whether that was comfort for him or just her wickedness, but it's a good point.
So sometimes, sometimes we don't want to give a person comfort in their sorrow. If they're having a godly sorrow, that's one thing, but just to be upset about something, that it's hard to comfort somebody in that situation.
Yeah.
And especially if the comfort, as Jezebel's comfort was wickedness, then we surely don't.
Comforted because he got up out of the bed after he got his vineyard.
Felt better. I thought about Hagar, Sarah's servant. When the first time after when Sarah gave Hagar to Abram to bear children for her in her name, and then she got pregnant, and then she was lording it over, as it were, contemptuous of Sarah, and Sarah kicked her out, and so it says in Genesis 16, that the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" She said, "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarah." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel said to her, "I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." And he says in the next verse, "You're pregnant, Ishmael will be your son, because the Lord has listened to you in your affliction." And she called the name of the Lord, who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." He says, "Truly here, I have seen him who looks after me." That to me is so much comfort, to know for her, it was comfort to know that God was looking after her. God was
Right.
there. He was seeing what was happening to her. And I think about how God sees what's happening to us. And that's a comfort to me to know that I'm not just out here, and things happening and nobody's paying attention and seeing about me, but God is always seeing about me. He's always watching out for us.
She thought she was going to die out there,
Mm-hmm.
and the child.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, this is very similar to the story when, put it down. I get some of my prophets mixed up. When, when Elijah had fled from Jezebel after the whole thing with the prophets, when he proved the idols had no power and God had all the power. But he's out in the desert and he wants to die. And God sends an angel, not just to comfort him, not just to give him words of comfort, but he actually fed him.
Right.
He slept and he fed, and then he said, pretty much, you could sum it up, get up and get back to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's the most comforting thing people can do, is to get their life back into some normal routine and not sit and dwell on something that's troubling them that they can't change. So he also comforted him and letting him know that there were plenty of other people on his side.
Mhm.
Right. Right.
So, we have a comment from Marcia Gray Patterson that echoes what Judy had said earlier. There are times when a person is grieving, and just being with them, just your presence, is a great comfort to them. And I thought that was a really good comment again, because so often we think, like you said, Judy, we've got to say just the right thing that'll be just perfect, and sometimes there isn't that. But um, this, there are other ways that God comforts us besides the saying of something. Anything else to add on this one?
I think about the patriarchs, all of the patriarchs. God repeatedly comforted them, and even going back to the beginning with Adam. Of course, he was in the garden with God and had that relationship. But I think about when, God brought all the animals before him and he named them. And but just before that, God says, it's not good that the man is alone, and I will make him a helper. And then he brings the animals, and then he makes woman, and Adam says, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman because she is taken out of man. But I mean, that was a comfort for him. That was a companion for him. God from the very beginning, looked out. And of course, then the rest of the patriarchs, Noah and Enoch and Abram and Isaac and Jacob and so on and so forth, God repeatedly gave them promises and comforted them. He was just that ever-present being in their lives that was always there to take care of them. And the God we serve is the same God. It hasn't changed. Praise God for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jill. Go ahead.
I was just asking if there were any other thoughts about God comforting us. And Jill?
Well, I was going to tag on to what Dana said, because I had thought about the husband-wife relationship as one of comfort. Especially, I was thinking about Rebecca and Isaac. Abraham had sent back for the servant to bring Rebecca, and says, then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. The physical, intimate relationship that a husband and wife who love each other in the Lord
Mhm.
just can't be beat for comfort.
No, that's right.
Amen.
And then,
Amen.
like Dana was saying, that's the way God designed us to be together.
Yeah.
Judy, did you lose your thought, or have you still got?
No, I think I still have it. I thought about when I was looking for different examples about Elisha the prophet and the woman of Shunem. I think that's how it's pronounced, Shunem. And this is like I said earlier about there's physical comfort and there's spiritual comfort, and this can be, I guess, in both. But the comfort that here's the prophet coming through town, and she comforts him by providing food, and then she asks her husband to have a place for him, make a place for him, and so they provide food and a room every time he comes through town. And so there's some physical comfort. I mean, he needed some place. I thought that was pretty good. And then he wants to do something that, for her, kind of in return. It sort of seems, of course, I'm paraphrasing everything. And he asks, his servant to ask her what she wants. And she doesn't really, she says, I'm dwelling here in my house. Basically, I'm happy, But the servant says to Elisha, but she doesn't have a son. And her husband's old. So he tells her, he comforts her by basically telling her, this time next year, basically, you're going to have a son. You will have a son. And she, kind of wasn't sure about that. But sure enough, she does. She has the son. And the child gets sick, and then he comforts her again. I'm cutting a lot out of this story, obviously. But he comforts her again. Elisha comforts her again by raising her child from the dead.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, I just really enjoy that account of Elisha, the prophet, and the woman, and the husband, and the servant. They were all part of that. Yeah.
It's interesting when you look at the Bible accounts. One of our sisters that I'm familiar with, she says, I hate to call them stories. She was because it sounds like fiction, and
Right.
they're true. So I try to say the account. When you look at those from the perspective of, let me see where the comfort is, then we see so much comfort in it, where I've never had thought of that as comfort. It just was what happened,
Right.
But how wonderful to look at it from that perspective. Really draws it out.
Yeah, he provided a lot. She provided a lot of comfort for him. It was physical comfort, but comfort it was, and she recognized this is a man of God, and she recognized.
And it's so much that and that her story of the man, what she did for him reminds me so much of, I remember as a child, my parents would, invite the preacher, especially if it was a visiting preacher. It would come to the house for dinner after the sermon or something. I can remember so often. And mother would, first thing, she'd fix a glass of iced tea, and she said, you take it to the preacher. He gets the first glass. He needs a glass of tea. I don't know if the man liked iced tea or not, but mother did. But it was just like that's a comfort. And I think so often in our homes we offer comfort through the food and through the service that we do for others is a comfort.
Yeah. Because the comfort, I mean, he didn't have to worry about where his next meal, where he was going to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty comforting.
It's very nice comforting.
My husband has done a lot of mission work in foreign countries, Central South America mainly, and there are several people over the years that would say to him, here's your Elisha room. And they always had a room ready for him.
Oh, how
and
nice.
and they, they housed him the whole time he would be there, and they fed him, and
Yeah.
the bond over the years that he has with these brethren. And I've gone a couple of times with him. I remember we went to Chile and Argentina, and there were these families that knew him. And when we got there, what they had was not much,
Yeah.
but it was given to us with great love. And what a comfort. And there's a particular preacher who lives in Chile that is just an amazing, humble man and has done so much for the work throughout the country there, and even Peru and so on and so forth. And he was able to come to the States and stayed with us when we lived in the Dallas area. And that was such a joy to me, because I'd stayed in his home. And I remember almost being I don't know if intimidated is the word, but I was very uncomfortable, because my home, in comparison to what they provided for us, was lavish.
Right.
Not that my home is lavish, but in
In
comparison.
Yeah.
But I can't express to you the joy it was for me, the honor it was for me to have this, to me, amazing, godly man in our home, because I know what they sacrificed to house us for 2 weeks and get us where we needed to go and everything. And I think it's a comfort on both sides, like you said, with Elisha and the woman. Yeah. It's a good point.
And I think sometimes we think, well, I'm not doing much,
It doesn't take much.
I know it. And sometimes we think, well, I can't, as a woman, as a Christian woman, there's not much I can do. But there is so much. And I think what you described there is exactly what we can make for a person who is a deacon, an elder, a teacher, a preacher. We can make a comfortable home, like Judy was saying with Elisha. Right. We can make that so they don't have to worry and wonder, what am I going to do? Where am I going to be when I get there? There will be a comfortable place for them, so that they can feel in a home-like environment. Obviously not at home, but still as home. I think that Mary and Martha did that.
I was just going to say, there's so many stories. That's one of them. Yeah.
They did that for Jesus. I mean, he would go and stay with them, with Lazarus, and again, that reciprocal comfort when Lazarus died, and Jesus comforted Mary and Martha and said, your brother will rise again. And they said, I know he will in the resurrection. But then Jesus raised him from the dead. And what comfort back and forth between those. And we do see that a lot in the Bible.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I have some personal experience with this, and I never, up until this moment, thought about the comfort part of it. And we used to have lots of young, they were mostly boys who would take up a place we had in the basement when they were going to college. They were going to college, and so they didn't have much money, whatever. But I just got to thinking now, what a comfort, hopefully, it was to their parents.
Yes.
To their parents, because their parents knew they were safe. They were in a Christian home. They were Christians. The kids were, And so it just dawned on me now. Like, I was just like, this is a place you can come and go and have food and whatever, So, but the parents could have been comforted knowing the safety.
Can we ever overemphasize the importance of hospitality, which is a dying thing today?
There you go.
We just don't. We all go out to eat on Sunday afternoons. We don't have people in our home. We don't. we're so busy, we don't have time for this, we don't have for, well, my house might not be big enough or elaborate enough or whatever. And what a shame, you know. You think about talking about people in the Bible characters, you know, Priscilla and Aquila opened up their home to Paul, and they even shared their livelihood together as tent makers. And there's a point, and I know I have it here somewhere, where Paul makes the point that they risk their lives. In Romans chapter 16, it says, greet Prisca and Aquila, my fellow workers in Jesus Christ, who risked their necks for my life, to whom not only I give thanks, but all of the churches in Galatia, of the Gentiles, give thanks as well. Greet also the church in their house. And these were people who opened their home up to the work of the Lord. And we can, you know, there's not any of us that have a house too small to have another person over and share a meal. And I don't care how small your house is or how whatever, it's good enough. And because we shouldn't be, it's not about the decorating, it's about the time that we spend with each other, and the physical reactions we have and the support we give to one another. Serve them hot dogs and potato chips on those cheap white paper plates. There's a sister I know of that, at least from my financial perspective, is very well off. And that's what she does with young people. And does it, she uses Oreo cookies and opens the package. She takes the potato chips and opens the package and has them for hot dogs and potato chips, young people, because she wants them to learn that lesson. It's not about what you have.
Right. That's right.
Sharing.
Yeah. Jill, we hadn't heard from you in a little while. We've been talking about.
I'm learning.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
I think a lot of what we're talking about is the relationship we have with each other as Christians. It's just so precious, and we know how to comfort one another because we have a common understanding of who God is and how he loves us, and what his church is to be and how we're to be toward one another. Whether we're going through a lot of things as a group, like they were in Thessalonians, when Thessalonians 5:11, he says, therefore, comfort each other and edify one another, just as you are also doing. But they were going through difficulties and persecutions, and we may not have that right now, but it's really more insidious. The society that we're living in today is a very difficult thing to navigate, and we find ourselves among people, maybe in our families or even in the congregation, who are affected by the social pressures that we have, and we need to encourage one another to, you know, keep striving to please the Lord and not to let these things bother us, and
not to be isolated, which is what we're all good at doing, is isolating ourselves. I'm really good at doing that. You know, I can just stay right here in this room and
close the door.
And if you want to come and join me, that's fine. But if you don't, that's okay. I can enjoy.
That's okay too.
And that's not good. We need to, like you said, Jill, we need to spend time. It's about relationships.
You know, just keep your eye on somebody. See if there is something bothering them, because, you know, sometimes it's some terrible, terrible thing that we must go through. Sometimes it's temptations, like Christ when he was tempted in the desert, and the angels came and comforted him. We just
How
need
about,
to see.
oh, I'm sorry, Jill. Sorry.
Go right ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking of the Good Samaritan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, wow. Think about that. What that's some account
Yeah.
a parable. And it's really great. I mean, it is a parable, but it's meant for us to learn, what was going on there. And the priest and everything who passed by, and then the Samaritan, stop. I mean, the help that was given, and he didn't just like bandage him up, which he did do, but then he takes him, puts him on his horse or whatever, and they go to the inn. And then at the inn, what I didn't realize is that he spends the night there also, because he doesn't leave till the next morning.
Mm-hmm.
So he spends the night, and then the next morning he leaves money, and he says, take care of him on my way back, whatever it has been incurred by him, I'll take care of that. I mean, how much comfort. I mean, the man was laid there to die. And he really, really, I mean, we know the Jews and the Samaritans, how they hated each other. So, wow.
Yeah, that wasn't people that had a relationship. That was
Right.
strangers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting, though, because just last night we're doing an in-depth study of the story of Ruth and Naomi. And that really is a parallel story to the Good Samaritan, because Naomi has lost her husband. He can't take care of her.
Right.
She's not in her home country. Even when she returns, her friends, they're happy to see her, but they don't offer to feed her. Ruth is the one who takes care of her, and Ruth is a Moabite.
Yes.
Just like the Samaritans were enemies of the Jews, so were the Moabites. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was reminded too of Joseph and his
Mm.
brothers in
Mhm.
Genesis chapter 50. But even before that, I mean, he had a relationship with them, but it was not a happy relationship. It was not a cordial, brotherly love sort of thing. And they sold him into slavery, he was only saved from being killed, because there was money involved, I guess. And I love in chapter 50 where Jacob dies, and they've been dwelling, living in the land here in harmony, apparently, for many years. And now, it all rushes back on the brothers, and they're saying, and they go to him and they say, Daddy said, be nice to us, don't kill us. Because of course, he could have, all he needed was the word, and they would just be gone. But Joseph comforts them, and he said, I'm not in the place of God. You meant evil for me, but God meant it to me for good and to save all of us. So he said, don't be afraid. I'll provide for you and for your families. And he comforted them, it says, and spoke kindly to them. And they did not have a good relationship earlier.
Right.
And they were afraid he was going to remember. But he had no intention of mistreating them at all. But they didn't know that. And the Samaritan had no relationship with this man and comforted them. And here was Joseph, who could have held a grudge, and yet he comforted them, just like God does us, like we started out with at the very beginning.
Right.
That even though we've done wrong, God comforts us as we are trying to do what's right.
Yeah.
One other thing that I thought about, as older women, hopefully teaching younger women and having relationships with them. I think that Mary and Elizabeth are beautiful examples, because when Mary ends up pregnant, can you imagine how terrifying that had to be? And the Bible doesn't tell us, but under the law, she could have been stoned by her own family, having gotten pregnant out of wedlock. And the scriptures tell us she left immediately and went to see Elizabeth. And when she got to Elizabeth, and I think what a comfort this had to be. In Luke chapter 1, verses 41 to 45, it says, and when Elizabeth heard the greeting of Mary, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, and she exclaimed with a loud cry, blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And then why is it granted to me that the mother of my Lord should come to me? Can you imagine the comfort that was to Mary?
Yeah.
And then I think about the confirmation to Elizabeth, because I mean, Elizabeth's old by this point, and now she's pregnant. And I imagine that these two women had a slumber party all night, crying and, you know, praying and everything else. And then Mary spends 3 months with her. Can you imagine the comfort they gave each other?
Yeah.
And we can do that across generational gaps. And I hear a really bad echo.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah.
Is that me?
It's so, well, we don't know, but our program's coming to an end. I think we're kind of at the end anyway, so we'll carry on with it. That's so true. And I like the way you talked about it cross generations. We talked about some multi-generational communication. And so often we think, well, I can't comfort younger ones. I don't know what they're going through. And young people may think, well, I can't comfort the old. I don't know what they're going through, but we still can.
Yeah.
Regardless, we don't have to let that be a barrier. In fact, there should not be any barriers for us to be able to comfort one another.
Exactly.
As Judy said, and as one of our viewers said, just being there, just being together can be such a wonderful comfort.
Right.
And remember what Jesus said in Matthew 11, 28 through 30, he said, come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. My yoke is easy. You know, I'm paraphrasing that, but my yoke upon you, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So the ultimate comfort that we need to look to Jesus.
Absolutely. Well said. And a wonderful, great way to end our program. Next week, we're going to have a guest speaker. Tamara Forsyth is going to be bringing us a lesson next week. And we're looking forward to that as well, a pre-recorded lesson that she's prepared for us. So thank you, ladies, so much for being on the program tonight. And thank you to all our viewers. We certainly do appreciate it. And we certainly do wish everybody a good night.
Good night.
Night all.